The taste of liver is hard to get off your tongue, but spleen does the trick. Small huddles of us, eating in our frenzied packs, dot the terminal. Many of you may remember that I reviewed the reimagining of The Evil Dead once before. In that review, aside from it spawning the first spoiler alert rant, I mentioned how I owned a copy of the original Evil Dead, but it was still sitting on my shelf covered in cellophane at the time. And well, given that it's Halloween, what better time than now to take it off the shelf, rip off the cellophane, pop it into the DVD player, and see why so many people claim that this film is a horror classic. So this may not be so much a monster clash, as it is an updated review of the 2013 reimagining by Fede Alvarez. Is it Fede or Fede? I don't know, doesn't matter. I may get a freight train full of flack for saying this, but The Evil Dead has not aged particularly well. It wears its cheapness on its sleeve. With what it has, it does a good job setting up an eerie atmosphere for the most part, but the effects are on the other side of laughably bad. Couple that with out-of-focus shots, weird composition choices, and effects that range from mildly creative and realistic to just not really making much sense at all, and you've basically got yourself a B picture. I will admit that there is a definite passion to this film, and that's probably why so many film students rally around it. I mean, it's very passionate, although it's also very amateurish, but a lot of film students want to follow that same sort of thing. The very passionate amateurish start that leads to a very successful career. I mean, look at where Sam Raimi ended up. I can see why film students like the film so much. In the case of the reimagining, it greatly benefited from the advances in special effects that have come about since 1981. One key difference that I also noticed is that the overall lack of color, or the fact that a lot of the more colorful items are really desaturated, which makes sense. It makes the overall gore and blood really pop out. And it's something that the original tried to do to some capacity, but you could tell they were kind of limited to the fact that their location had a few colorful things, and the fact that they were shooting on film as opposed to shooting on digital. Now, I understand comparing an indie film to a multi-million-dollar blockbuster project isn't entirely fair, but they both bear the same name, both were produced by Sam Raimi, and so really, looking at them side by side, it's pretty clear which film had the better sense of atmosphere and just had an overall better visual feel. The 2013 version. Now, what a lot of people may not realize is that much of what we associate with the Evil Dead franchise, such as kind of the cheesy humor and the overall coolness of Ashley Williams, didn't really come about in the original Evil Dead. It came about in Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. With the original Evil Dead, it's played completely straight, as we have the typical setup of a group of friends deciding to chill in a cabin for vacation and accidentally unleashing the forces of evil and getting killed one by one, with Ash being the lone survivor. And another key difference is that while in later films Ash isn't as much of a cliche and actually has more of its badass moments, here he's more of the meek everyman who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying desperately to survive. Which it did show some pretty good range for Bruce Campbell when it came to his acting, because let's face it, the guy's been typecast in a lot of roles, and so it actually was kind of interesting to see him at his start when he wasn't typecast as kind of the B-movie badass and was instead capable of playing just normal, meek everyman. It's pretty bare bones in its approach when it comes to the horror film setup. I mean, we get a little bit of character development, but most of the film is dedicated to scares, chills, and kills. It has a very drive-in quality, which is probably what they were going for, considering the kind of market research they did to see which horror films did well at the drive-in theaters. In the case of the 2013 reimagining, the story's a little more fleshed out. We spend a little more time getting to know the characters, understanding their backstories and motivations to a certain degree, and giving the whole thing a lot more depth. And yes, the gores and kills are still there, but now they come with a little more bite, now that we actually know who the characters are and actually have more of a capacity to actually get attached to them. Some of them are still kind of caricature-ish in some ways, but it's still just a case of we were able to get a little more attached to them, whereas in the original, the only one we really got attached to was Ash, and that was about it. On top of that, I find it a lot more convincing when the characters themselves read from the Book of the Dead and accidentally unleash the forces of darkness, as opposed to having an outdated tape recording do it. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite wrap my head around that, because in a lot of the stories I've read where people have done stuff regarding like evil things they shouldn't mess with, I've yet to have seen a recording actually trigger it in a very believable way, because more often than not, the recording usually doesn't work. The only problem I had with the remake was the same thing that I had a problem with when I reviewed it the first time. The last 15 minutes is devoted entirely to fan service. Now, I've got nothing against fan service, but I hate it when films will go out of their way and almost damage their own story to accomplish it. If the film ended with David dying as the cabin blew up and having Mia escape, or having it start to rain blood and then ending it right there, the film would have been a whole lot stronger if it kept that sort of thing ambiguous. And if you wanted the abomination in the film, then David should have really been the one to fight it, not Mia. David was the character we were following throughout the entire film. He's the one that we've mostly gotten to care about over the course of the entire story, and as such, he would be the one to actually deal with the abomination if you're really wanting to have a strong, final, big, climactic, but cheesy fight scene. Because that's the key important thing. With the original Evil Dead and the later films, Ash is the one we follow throughout the entire film, and as such, we relate to him and ultimately root for him to succeed, even if he does get killed off in the end. But here, it just makes no sense to have Mia, who's essentially been out of commission the entire film, fight the abomination at the very end. Even now, watching the film again, that still bothers me. Also, what was the point of this? I mean, seriously, what was the point of that? Looking at the stories of both films, while I did have a problem with the remake, I definitely got a lot more out of it because I was really invested in the characters, which makes the last 15 minutes really frustrating. In the case of the original, I didn't really feel that. You could tell a lot of the characters were there to just kind of add to the body count. You didn't really get much insight into their personalities, aside from a few cliches, and while it does a good job following Ash for the most of the film, even Ash himself in this film is kind of a dopey, mopey, cliched everyman in the negative sense. It's just a case, although we got a little bit about his personality, we do see some resourcefulness, there's just not much there to it, as basically everything's more about the effects and everything kind of happening around him, but not in a good way. And again, I saw Army of Darkness before I saw The Evil Dead, and so I kind of still have kind of the image of Ash being more of a badass, and so maybe that kind of colored my perceptions a little bit, but let's just say the writing and production quality definitely got better in the later two Evil Dead films, and this one just... it doesn't hold up. It just doesn't. As such, I'm giving this round to the 2013 version. Even if the fan service scene is For the sake of brevity, I'm not gonna have a round 3. I just couldn't find something in both films that I didn't already talk about in the previous 2 rounds. There was no common like monster or theme or anything, and there was neither a common Ash thing in either films. Plus, given that the 2013 version has won both rounds, there'd be no point in really having a 3rd round except to give one to the old one out of pity, kind of like what I did for the Fright Night remake. It's clear that the 2013 version took the original concept and original ideas of the Evil Dead film and gave it a really good facelift. If they only didn't try to cater to fans at the very last minute, it would have been a much stronger film. But at this point, the horse is dead. It's time to stop beating it. This final clash of 2013 ends in favor of the 2013 version of Evil Dead, the superior film. I hope you've enjoyed this series of battles in this year's Monster Clash. If your plans today include any movie marathons in some capacity, then I hope I've given you an idea of what kind of films to look out for to pick up if you're able to. I mean, rental houses are non-existent, libraries are out of the question, so you're probably only going to be looking at Netflix, but I hope I've given you an idea of what stuff to kind of give your time to. There are many horror films out there. I mean, a lot. It's a big genre, and it's what a lot of people got started in. I mean, there are some good horror films, some bad horror films, and then some films that are bad but get praised by audiences despite having the gore effects and writing of a badly made student film. Seriously, why the hell do you people like your next? Here's to a happy Halloween, dear viewers. May it be filled with frightful fun and merriment. Just don't get too carried away, because having to clean vomit off one's front porch the following morning is not a very fun thing to do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go take some pictures of ghosts and hang out with the spookies for a little bit. But for now, good night, dear viewers. Good night.